right now, I wanted to make this video is that I've been playing this VR game called Rubble. It's an earthbending game, and I've been really interested in the complexity of it, of the mental game, and of the gameplay itself. And I wanted to see what a really competent fighting game player would say to that. I've asked some community questions in the Rumble community what they are curious about from a fighting game perspective, and I think there's a lot to learn there. And so that's why I kind of made this video, or what I'm making it. First up, let me introduce myself. I am Gort, and this is Kyo. I'm a Rumble player. I'm pretty decent. I'm not one of the best players out there. Been playing for about half a year now, or a bit more than half a year. I've got about 300 hours in the game, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. And Kyo, tell me a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Kyo. I'm a high-level player, primarily in Grand Blue and Guilty Gear. I've been playing fighting games for a while, but I would say that I started competing seriously around 2022, so about 3 years.
Okay, so you go to competitions and play against other strong players. Hi.
I go to locals. I've been to a couple majors. My highest result at a major was 33rd out of over 1,000 at Combo Breaker last year.
Oh, that's very good. My results in Rubble not that impressive. I've been to a beginners tournament when I was just starting out, which was the bigger one at that time. I did decently, but I have been competing against people that were playing a lot longer than myself in that one.
I see.
And I'm gonna just join the actual competition now again and see how well I do. Right, so I'm gonna go quickly about the plan for today. I've already introduced us. I'm gonna give a quick presentation about what Rumble is, this VR game, and I'm gonna give a basic introduction to more advanced Rumble technique. And in the presentation, I'm gonna have these little exclamation mark, question mark symbols. You can see one at the bottom right. And basically I put those wherever I think I have some questions to ask you that would be really interesting, where we can have a little discussion where, I show something about the background of the question, for example, movement or defense from the perspective of Rumble. Then we can kind of deepen that and have the fighting game perspective on that.
Sounds good to me.
Right. And later on, we might analyze some high-level Rumble gameplay if I'm successful in actually, showing what these techniques in Rumble, how they work, what the rules are, hopefully making it easy to understand, even a pretty complex game. And then maybe we can get some insights there.
Sounds
and
good
at the very end, I might throw in some questions I have left that we didn't cover during the presentation that I was curious about, that other people were curious about. And if you have any questions during the presentation, anything you find curious or interesting, where you get an idea, feel free to, just disrupt me in my presentation, and we'll just keep going, because kind of the theme of this is curiosity, what we are interested in, and just going with that.
Mm-hmm.
So here is Rubble, one of the promotional pictures of it. Right, it's a VR game. It's a pretty damn complex VR fighting game. I say fighting game because it's two players trying to beat each other in a competition, beat each other, reduce the health of the opponent, and not get hit themselves. Right. So it's based on Waterbending from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's physics based. So in addition to the basic rules of the game, you also have physics interaction between the rocks, the structures, and the player, which makes it really interesting and complex. And there's emergent gameplay that really wasn't intended from the beginning by the developers, as far as I know, where the community has done a lot to explore what you can and can't do in this game, and really pushed it a lot. Right now it's still in early access. We're in version 0.4 something right now. Right now it's a PC exclusive, so you do need a headset and a PC to run it. However, currently it's planned that by the end of 2025, they'll get the Quest version. How true that is, we don't know yet, but that's the current plan. And we're going to have a lot of new players joining the game, when that happens. And I hope this video can kind of give an introduction of what Rumble is and what makes it so fun for me. What gives it the complexity that everyone's talking about. And so next, right now, I have the trailer to the game. It's from the Steam page, and it's kind of you see some features of Rumble in here, and kind of I'll call it the intended way of playing Rumble. It's not that the stuff well, a lot of the stuff we are doing nowadays wasn't intended, but it's, a result of the basic interactions. You can see here already. I'm just going to start it and play the video. So you're going to see two players, throwing rocks at each other, trying to damage each other, and you see the basic physics interactions of the game. So this was from 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So it's almost 3 years old now, since we're still in the beginning of 2025. And then, as a kind of comparison of where we are right now, I have a compilation of a player called Bobo, who has kind of recently assembled a compilation of some of his moves against other players. We're not going to watch the full thing. I do recommend looking at it if you have the time. I'm just going to skip to somewhere in the middle and let it speak for itself. You're going to see a lot of the same interactions. Well, it's going to look a little overwhelming maybe, but alright, we'll go over what's happening at a later point. You can kind of see the complexity of the game. I'm going to skip forward a little. Right, it's the same two players trying to hit each other. The speed is a lot different. You have a lot more structures lying around. You have explosions, knocking structures into other structures, flight, taking control of the opponent's structures, chains of attacks, aerial attacks, counters to that, and here another flight attack. He's going to catch the cube, then attack with both of them. And we're going to see some ricochets too, I think, where you can see structures bouncing off another structure, into another structure, and then into the opponent. And that's a lot of interaction, that's a lot going on. But you can see the complexity and the plays here have changed a lot over the last years. And we're still working on kind of developing it, bring it further. And one great thing is that this gameplay footage is gonna look a lot different from other players, because people really do develop their own styles in a very unique way you don't see in a lot of other games. Alright, so I'm gonna go over the rules real quick, because, well, I think it's good to cover. So it's 1v1 fights. You are fighting in a ring. You can see one on the bottom right there. If you get ring out, you lose. You try to stay in there. Both players try to summon structures. So I'm going to call rocks structures a lot throughout this game. Basically, it's the rocks in different shapes. There are smaller structures, bigger structures, and you can affect them through doing poses with your body. I said before, it's more motion control of the game. There are really no buttons you're using in this game. You are only using the joystick for movement, but that's only one of several movement options that don't need a joystick. And there's also no direct damage, so you can't just go up to your opponent and punch them. That doesn't work. You have to use structures. And those structures interact with physics. You've seen earlier in the video a pillar pushing away a disc, and it causes a lot of interesting situations. But the basic premise is try to hit your opponent with rocks and try not to get hit yourself. Right, let me get to my questions, because I had some prepared for this part. So looking at the basic premise of Rubble, of the game, how does it compare to the basic premise and rules of a fighting game? I, for example, look especially at the no direct damage part here, where you can't directly, punch your opponent. I feel like that's, something that really sets it apart from a fighting game. What do you think? What do you think, looking at the rules compared to the rules of a normal fighting game? The real core basic.
It's very distinct in that way from a traditional fighting game. There are projectile-based fighting games. I think Maiden and Spell, which is a bullet hell-inspired game, where you can't hit your opponent, but you can shoot Danmaku at people. But the idea of positioning seems very similar. I think of Virtua Fighter, where ring out is a big deal, where you kind of want to push your opponent into the corner, and then they have less options while they're there, and therefore you can hit them with more complicated attacks because they can't move backwards, and sideways is also restricted.
You can move sideways here, but sideways movement on the outside of the ring is always going to be a lot slower than sideways movement on the inside.
Exactly.
Just by, basic geometry, which is something we'll get to a bit more about positioning and movement later. Right, I think that covers that question pretty well. Let's get into a bit more detail. So I've talked about the rules, but that's not what makes it interesting. What makes it interesting is the basic building blocks. Well, how you can use the basic building blocks of Rubble. And there's, three basic building blocks, I'd say. There is the structures and the unique structure behavior. So a small structure is going to act different than a big structure. Smaller or faster ones do less damage. Bigger ones are slower and have more drag to them. And those structures, by their geometry, we don't have hitboxes for the structures, it's just the structures themselves. So because the surface of the structures are not regular completely, they cause very unique reactions. You can predict really well just by experience and, an intuitive grasp of physical interactions. Another core aspect of Rumble is the movements. So body movements cause structure movement. Not or most of the time, not by directly touching the structure and moving it, but instead by doing certain poses, which are doing certain inputs in a fighting game, which then have certain effects on the structure. And then connecting those poses, those movements into combos, which in this case is just chains of poses for complex effects on the structure. And if each structure has a different reaction to these combos and different interactions with other structures, that's quite the complexity already. And these are the structures we have. Larger structures do more damage, smaller structures are faster, and your hits are determined through relative velocity. What does that mean? It means if you're moving backwards while the structure is coming towards you, you might not actually get hit if you're moving at a similar speed to the structure or a faster one. So it's not a on-touch damage. It's always relative. It's also relative to the angle sometimes. So you'll have ricochets of the structures bouncing off other structures, or a hit stun, which I'll go into later. And they have different uses. So discs are easy to spam, easy to do small amounts of damage. Walls can destroy a lot of other structures, but take more time to summon as well. There's a little clip that Shulas made. It's really good. I really recommend his skill tree as well as the resource and his videos. Basically, structures have a certain value to them. Bigger structures are going to have a bigger value, and that's how much damage they do to you. That's also how much damage they do to other structures. If you have there's certain modifiers they can have. Basically, if a stone is moving, it's going to do more damage than a stone that isn't. I think that's pretty intuitive. So if something is just standing on the ground, you have a loose pillar, and a ball is moving towards it, it can destroy it. And if it's grounded, it's strengthened by the ground. It's limited to ground surface movement, but it gets stronger as well. Here's a nice graph there, and the basic rules of the structure is strongest structures destroy weaker ones, and the same values negate. So this is don't worry too much about this chart I made at the bottom. It's just the base value plus 1 if it's moving, plus 1 if it's grounded, and if it's grounded and moving, it's a plus 2 total, right? So let's say you want your opponent shooting a disc at you, 1 damage. You can summon a pillar, and then the disc breaks on the pillar. If your opponent summons a cube now, though, and shoots it at your pillar, it's going to break the pillar and still hit you, because it destroys the weaker ones and continues moving. I think that's fairly simple. It's just
makes sense.
Modifying the structures changes how strong they are. And the stronger the better. Hitting someone with 20 discs would kill them for 1 damage each. Probably not a good strategy. A very annoying one. But hitting someone with 4 walls would also do the job, because we have 20 HP total. Right. Then, next thing I said is poses, right? You trigger certain effects in the world by doing poses. There are 17 poses total. That sounds a lot. It is kind of a lot, but you unlock 2 to 3 as you rank up with each level. So you go through the belts, white belt, yellow belt, and so on until you get your black belt and have all the moves unlocked. That's kind of the tutorial for the game. There's 6 poses for summoning rocks, 3 for moving rocks, 2 that gives you kind of a telekinesis kind of ability, more fluid movement of rocks, 3 defensive ones, 3 ones to move yourself, and 1 that kind of modifies the structure. And they said earlier, have different effects on different structures, so it becomes pretty complex when you reach the actual combos. Right, the basic tools for moving something: a straight, a kick, and an uppercut. It's basically, they're based on or similar things from actual combat, where the straight is just a forward punch, which shoots a structure forward. Pretty intuitive. A kick, we don't have legs in Rumble, it only tracks your hands and head. So you gotta kick with your with your hands, so to say. It bounces off the structure, kind of you see in the GIF here, which you can then, further move. And an uppercut, also pretty intuitive. It makes a structure move up and forward. And it also adds a little rotation to it. However, all of these move straight forward from where you're looking. That's a bit too far forward. Right. So the structures and poses are the kind of the building blocks of Rumble. What are the basic building blocks of a fighting game?
Well, I guess poses would be similar to a special move, a
Mhm.
fireball or a reversal or something like that. Whereas the structures would be your normal moves, so your kicks and your punches and stuff like that. I actually have a question. You mentioned that it would have some rotation. Does rotation have a significant impact on gameplay? Does topspin matter? Does
Yes, actually. So depending on the structure, I'm gonna go back to the different geometries here for a second. So if you add spin to different structures, they have a bit of a different effect. For example, cubes, they are cubes. They are really good for rolling. So if you add a spin to it, it goes further than if you didn't add a spin to it. It would just kind of slide along the ground, and then you have more friction. Also, you can hit people with different sides of objects. If you want, you could make them hit someone with the edge of a pillar or the edge of a wall, right at the very top, which is a lot harder to block for the defensive part. Also, because structures are interacting with each other and acting at different heights, a disc isn't gonna just appear on the ground level. I've kind of laid it down here. It's gonna appear at chest height, and it's gonna fly on that level as well. And a cube is just barely too low to block a disc, so a disc goes over a cube. However, if you were to add some spin to the cube, an uppercut, the rotation would then raise the height of the cube enough to block the disc. Same with balls as well. They would normally fly over the height of the cube, and adding that rotation adds extra defense to you just by the geometry. So it does matter, and it also changes how combos work, because I said basic building blocks. That means, well, you gotta put them together into something else, right? And uppercut is really nice. It's not that intuitive on its own, because in a lot of cases what it does is it just makes a structure flip forward a little. If you had a wall that spawns upwards, using just an uppercut in it would just make it kind of fall down flat on its face. Not that useful, and kind of unintuitive for a lot of people starting out. Great question though. Right, so I'm going to get into combos now. Basically, it's just chaining together different poses. In the top right, I have a little image here of each chain together an uppercut. You add a rotation, you add a straight, it adds forward movement, and you add a kick, which adds height to it. I'm going to show some videos in a little bit of a couple different combos, so you see how different they can be. But in this case, it's an uppercut followed by a straight, followed by a kick. And I've kind of made some diagrams here showing the progression of a beginner player to someone who really knows what they're doing. Because you trigger poses, there's a certain hitbox. So because we're not perfect, machines, we need some room for error in our poses. That means you don't have to actually hit the exact same point with each pose. You can kind of hit a point in the hitbox. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's as far as I want to go for now. And the idea is you can move from one hitbox directly to another one instead of striking an uppercut, then going back to your kind of core, striking a straight, you're punching something, and then punching down, you're doing a kick here. Instead of that, you can connect them, smoothen out the movement into a curve shape, so it becomes actually ergonomic, the movements your body is doing. And then you're kind of optimizing where you put your hand in the hitbox. This is really something special to this game, because how you move, how you do the combo, has a huge difference on how it works, if it even does work. 3-hit combos, 4-hit combos are really difficult to do unless you actually flow through them. You actually know how to optimize them. So it's not that you unlock new moves after you've cleared the tutorial. You have to actually learn them and learn how to do them and get better at them. Right, here are some combos. I hope you can see them. Also this one, taken from the Schuler skill tree. Wonderful resource. So this first one is just a straight. It goes one pillar distance for a wall. And then adding a kick to it, kick straight, kind of makes it bounce a little bit. It goes a little further, flips over. And then having an uppercut here on the 4th row makes it have a bit more forward spin for the move. And that's just 2-hit combos, combining 2 of the basic building blocks. We can combine 3 or more though. These are 3-hit combos. You can see we're already clearing the second pillar easily, and we're getting a lot more varied arcs. higher arcs, lower arcs, more spin, less spin, and it's really getting a lot more complex. Now we go to 4-hit combos, which are very difficult to do. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of skill, because you have to, before the structure moves away from you, moves outside of your range, do all the inputs. And it's not as easy as, pressing a button on a controller. You have to actually move your body, and the poses are pretty far apart sometimes.
You can't see it, but I'm mimicking the motion right now.
If you are mimicking the motion, you can. It's going from the very top. I kind of showed this here, right? It's right around shoulder or head height, right in front of you, and then at your hip level. And there's different hand. The rotation of your hand is also important, but don't worry about that for now. In this video, that is. Here, this one is a really good example of top spin, making a structure roll actually forward and clearing a lot more distance. Do you see this? Mm-hmm. Right. So combining 4 combos is not easy, and all of these, especially the later ones, were discovered by kind of the community. I don't think more than a 2-hit combo was ever intended to be done, at least for now. First up, what are combos in fighting games? And are they something that's discovered by the community, or is it something that's set by the developers of the game for fighting games?
These seem more to me more complicated motion inputs, or analogous however we do it, because this is a difficult move rather than a combo, whereas in a fighting game, a combo is more something you do after you hit your opponent.
Okay, so it's a different term. It's more follow-up after a hit that you would call a combo. All right. In Rumble, this is what we call a combo, just because I'll go about the development of these terms for the community a bit later, but we are kind of picking words from other contexts and putting them into new context, putting new meaning on them. Right, so I guess what I'm asking then is, tell me about these more complex moves where you have to combine button inputs to get a certain result. I don't know a lot about fighting games, but I feel throwing a fireball or something takes a couple more inputs than just a straight up punch, right?
Yes. So those are called motion inputs. So essentially in most fighting games, you have to do different motions on either your stick or I play on D-pad, but essentially they are dependent on directions. So you have 8 directions and neutral as well. So 9 directions. And, go around in a circle, that's called a 360. Do a quarter circle, that's how you throw a fireball. You go from down to forward, that's the quarter circle. So those are called motion inputs. There are very difficult motion inputs, but traditionally they're relatively easy. Usually you're not going to see things harder than half circles in most games, but there are certainly exceptions. King of Fighters is famous for its pretzel motion, which is down, back, forward, half circle back, down, forward.
Oh boy, that sounds a lot. So this would be a half circle movement, if we're trying to transfer concepts.
Uppercut, straight, kick, in that order would be a half circle from up to down.
Okay, interesting. There's other poses too so I've got what we call combos usually mostly includes these modifiers. So straight modifies the structure, it moves it forward. But summoning structures are also movements. It would be, you'd have to, for example, to summon a wall, you have to first place your hands at your hip, and then both of them above your head, kind of pulling a wall off the ground. Earthbending. And that also by itself would be a half circle movement, I guess. In that case. Okay, interesting.
Or it might also be more similar to a charge input where you do down to up, just down straight to up.
Well, if you have to be a little careful with the movements here, because if you just think in straight lines, it's gonna hurt your body. Because Rumble is also a bit of sport, because you're using your body as the input. We're not made for straight lines. We're made for curves. Our wrist, if you rotate it, it rotates in a circle. Your elbow rotates in a circle. Your shoulder moves in a circle. Your hip moves in a circle. Your head too. It's all circles. It's all curves. And so if you just move in a straight line from bottom to up or from up to down, it might actually be faster and more natural to just move your hand in a circle movement. Well, in Rumble, I'm sure it's not the same. It's on a joystick D-pad. So those movements, motion inputs you said, are those set by the developers always, or are they also stuff that's developed by the community or discovered?
So those would be pure, well, I shouldn't say purely. They are designed by the developers, but there are certainly exceptions where advanced techniques are discovered by the community.
Do you have an example?
So, very simple one. There are a lot of supers that require a double quarter circle. So you do a quarter circle forward, you go back to neutral, and then you go down and do another one. In old games, it was discovered that the first quarter circle, let's say you're doing a fireball into a super. So that's quarter circle forward and then 2 quarter circles forward. The first quarter circle would count towards the super input and the fireball. So you'd only have to do 2 quarter circles.
I see. We have kind of, I guess it's not that similar because it's I'll cover that later then. The kind of the order of the inputs you can also switch it off a little bit here, but it's a bit more complicated. Normally, if you do, it'll have a different effect. It's not gonna have the same effect, but it's an option. All right, I'm gonna keep going with the next poses you can do. The next 2 poses I want to talk about is hold and flick. Each kind of trigger when you pass through the pose, and then you keep control of the object. It's turning on and off your telekinesis ability. Hold is one-handed telekinesis. It's kind of a weak bond. You lift your arm up, and then the structure is going to lift up as well. You lift your arm down, the structure is going to go down as well. It's not going to rotate it, it's just changing the position. You can use this to throw things, or to position cover in front of you, to have a mobile cover, or to fly as well, and to do other stuff with it. But mainly it's for throwing rocks and catching stuff. Catching something and then throwing it back is how I use it most of the time. And then flick is a bit different from your classic telekinesis. It's having a rubber band placed between your hands, and then in the middle of the rubber band is the structure. And it's gonna, if you rotate your hands, it will rotate the structure. You're grabbing onto the north and south pole of the structure and rotating it. It's really weird. It's normally unbreakable. Hold, if you move too fast, it's gonna break. Flick has no such limit. You can move as fast as you want. It's not gonna break on you, which causes some problems as well. But it's a lot of control, and that's really useful. This case, these 2 enable curved movements as well, which is pretty huge because
Basically walls and stuff.
You can get around stuff, and the basic building blocks of the combos, the kick, straight, and uppercut, those all move an object. If you imagine a line coming out from your nose, along that line, straight forward. Flick and hold, you can get silly with those. And the more freedom you give a player with these things, with these physics, in this physics playground we have in Rubble, the more weird stuff they're gonna do with it. I've chosen Hisoka's bungee gum as kind of an example of flick because it is rubbery. It kind of bounces back and forth. It's also very sticky when it needs to. Right, so I'm gonna cover some examples for hold, using hold for offense. Basically, throwing things, hitting someone with a big brick. Depending how you do it, it's gonna go further or not as far. If you think back to the combos earlier, the forehead ones cleared 4 pillar distance, and the lower level combos didn't get as far. So this is a really good way to get a structure a long distance and quick. And you already see here the bounce when it hits the ground. These interactions get pretty complex with hold because you have different angles. You can control the timing more than with the basic combos, the basic modifiers. Right, this is a clip from one of my fights where I use hold to attack. Basically, I do summon a wall, use 2 kicks, and then I slingshot the wall against my opponent.
Then you do a little dance.
And then I do a little dance. This is the running movement. So there's a pose for running as well, which basically lets you move faster when you do it. You'd have to do it on the left and then the right and left and right in kind of an exchange though. So sometimes you're gonna see people do a little dance. That's to get a movement boost.
I thought you were just happy. I thought you were just happy to hit him.
I was also happy to hit it, to be honest. Right, summon the wall, do 2 kicks, and then throw it over. I think it's pretty intuitive how it works, just by kind of looking at it. This is really, once you learn hold, it's where you feel an actual earthbender. Because you can, move combos. The basic modifiers, the straight and the kick and an uppercut, aren't that intuitive. For your brain, though, grabbing something and throwing it, super intuitive. You know what you're doing. You know what, if you want to do something, move from here to here, you know what you gotta do. your brain is already really good at it. So this feels awesome when you first time. Flick is really weird. I've already said it's stretchy and sticky, kind of like the bungee gum. And the example here I have is of the woman trying to throw a melon with a catapult and hitting herself. Because it's kind of a meme of the community because it's so easy to damage yourself. I mean, imagine attaching a ball to a rubber band and then throwing it as hard as you can, and the rubber band just pulls it back into your face. If you're fast enough, you could catch it on the rebound, but the best thing is just not to miss. But it's difficult. However, that level of control has a lot of nice effects if you know what you're doing. I have some awesome examples here of people that actually know what they're doing. So these are posts from people uploading it in the community. One is from Shoeless, one is from Dizzy. Two people really advancing Flick in different directions. And, when people discover a new move, a new combo, a new use for a move, they post it in the community and post a little clip of it as well to show that it's viable and it actually works. Right, as I said, it adds curves. Flick adds curves to your attacks. It's still easy to hit yourself, but if you have the skill for it, it's awesome. There's a really high skill ceiling because what you can do with it is a lot. You can do it use it for melee and for flight. I already said hold breaks if you move too fast. Flick doesn't. So there's no speed limit on your flight if you're skilled enough at not throwing yourself off the map and not hitting yourself. Both are not easy. So this is an example by Dizzy Dreaming, where she uses the kind of curves and the rebound of Flick to steal a structure, hook it behind it and pull it towards her. I thought that was a really awesome example of that skill, because it uses those curves and shows what someone can do with a lot of control. You did not see that one coming. And this one kind of, you can see here like in the Hisoka example, that also what reminds me of the bungee gum. What is going on? Come on, no, there we go. Right, so you dodge the projectile, and then on the rebound, because the rebound doesn't just go forward, it also goes backwards. You can hit him on the way back. I think it's really awesome. This is an example of using Flick for flight. Basically, it's using the troll physics, attaching a magnet to yourself and a magnet on a fishing line or something, or pulling yourself. Something like that, where you use a structure to push yourself and fly, basically. Here we have an example of Solo Junior, awesome flyer, great clips. So he goes in the air, catches this other cube, and then comes back down, pushing himself forward with both cubes in the air to get a faster attack. So this is really fast if you do it right, really risky, but a lot of fun. So these moves allow direct manipulation of structures with a huge level of control. Are there any similarities you can think of in fighting games where you have that same level of control? Is it just your character's movement itself? Or are there other things where you see something where the skill of the user has a huge impact on the actual what you can do with this tool?
Oh, absolutely. Games? So there's a couple of good examples. In Marvel vs. Capcom 3, there's a mechanic called flight, usually inputted with quarter circle back S, and basically your character kind of floats in the air and has a bunch of different air dashes. But the cool thing about it is that the unfly, the canceling of the fly, is also really important because it means you can do really, really fast overheads, or you can do combos that wouldn't normally be possible, really low to the ground. There's also good examples that are kind of similar to this of dash jump cancels. Basically, there's this mechanic in fighting games called Kara canceling, where you cancel the startup of something, so the beginning of the move. And if you cancel the startup of a dash into a jump in a lot of games, you get a ton of momentum and go flying.
Okay. So basically, you're canceling the part of the movement where you would be normally stopping.
You're canceling the acceleration into a jump, so your acceleration goes into the jump.
We have something similar in the movement here, where if you combine different movements, combine a dash into a jump, you're gonna go further than just doing a jump. Also because it's based on kind of combining the the different. You saw it on the combos, combining different force vectors on the structures. One going up, one going forward, and one going up, and a little bit of rotation forward creates a unique movement. And the same is true with structures here. Interesting. So, do you see a lot of that at high level play compared to
Absolutely.
low level play?
So let's get even more complicated. So I mentioned the dash jump cancel. There's a character in Guilty Gear named Slayer, and he uses the dash jump cancel to go really far. But if he does dash cancel, jump cancel, and then cancels the startup of the jump into a command grab, he can slide across the ground really far while command grabbing. And he's a vampire, so he bites you.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm really interested in seeing where the community is going to take these areas where you have that high level of control, because the skill of the user directly translates to what you can do with it. I'm really curious where we're going. We haven't been that active for long. A year and a half ago, you would not see this kind of stuff. It's more of a new development. I'm very curious. All right, let's keep going. Unless you had any more questions, of course.
No, I'm good.
All right. Right. If another example of flight, and of course, if you have flight, you have people developing anti-air options. This isn't classical anti-air. I just thought it was an interesting clip because you have someone countering flight with flight. This is clip by Board Yoshi. He's launching a cube. Normally, flight players cannot resist something like that, and they're gonna go for it. And because if they don't have to do the setup themselves, it saves them a lot of time getting structured into there. So it's an aerial attack, catching it, trying it, and then the other person catches it and gets him on the rebound, which I thought was really well done and a really interesting example of how two players with the same skill but slightly different skill levels can outplay each other on the very small details there. That's not an easy thing to do for sure. Right, so this is a very interesting topic that a lot of people don't know about in Rumble. It's more of an estimate for a lot of people, but really for us, it's super important. So what I've done here, or rather what I've tried to do, is use different clips, different pictures of people manipulating each objects. Special thanks to a friend of mine. This is Odwamne, or Wattson in the community. He's done some of the work here trying to actually find the zone, because this is the range in which you can directly move and modify structure. So it's a half cake slice. If you had a cake and slice it in half, that's kind of the shape you have. And if there's a structure in range and you do a move, if you use a hold or if you use an uppercut, it's going to affect the structure that's in it. Outside the range, you can't directly affect stuff. You can't grab things. This is the range of your effect. And I've so to me this kind of looks it's a similarity to hitboxes in fighting games, where each player has a certain range in which they're the most effective or they have the most control. And it's not exactly one-to-one. You can't directly punish someone, I already said it. There has to be a structure in range. But the thing that's really interesting here is you have to find some way to break through the opponent's control range. Because they can just defend against structure as soon as it's in the range. And there's some good ways around it. This range is affected by the center of the mass of the object, by the way. So a pillar could hit you from above in your head on the long side, without you being able to catch it. While a disc, it would be in range fast enough. So you could catch it if you have the reflexes for it. So this alone doesn't change shape. Your body does, though. And with it does your actual hitbox in the game. I want to talk a bit about spatial awareness, because you put on a headset, you can't look behind your head. You don't have a top-down perspective. You don't have a side perspective where you kind of omnisciently see the whole map. You're limited by your blind spot. You're limited by dust that gets created by collisions. You can't see through blocks. So if there's a wall in front of you, you can't see anything behind the wall. You're in 3D space, and you do have additional information, sounds and shadows when you're playing. So even if someone's behind a wall and you see their shadow, you know exactly where they are. In the right here, I've kind of sketched out the FOV of a Quest 3, which is what I'm using for playing Rumble, and the human eye. And you can see, especially in the horizontal range, there's a huge limit to what you can see in the game, which does affect gameplay a lot and the way you have to think about positioning and where you are in the game. About the additional information you have in this game in Rumble, I have a couple questions here. First up, do you ever have spots or times where your vision is limited in your games?
It highly depends on the game. I would say most of the time, no. But there are certain instances where this is the case. First is characters that turn invisible, which does happen occasionally. And the other is highly vertical games. I mentioned Marvel vs. Capcom, where characters are jumping really high. There's still a little bit of an indicator of where you are, so you're not getting completely lost. But the person who is jumping in the sky has the camera follow them.
Okay.
Which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the situation.
When you're playing with your little brother in a video game and the camera is following the main controller, two-player game. Okay, so it's a niche situation. Do you ever use additional information, though, in addition to just what you can see in this game? Does sound tell you something or other things?
Sound is sometimes important. Sound effects can matter. Sound effects can also, because the human brain reacts faster to audio than visuals, for reactable things, a lot of times you want to react to a sound effect more than the visual.
Okay. So you can hear different structures when summoned, and different combos have different sounds. It's all crunchy sounds. Some of them are the same, some of them are different, and you can hear what an opponent's combo is by the rhythm of the attack. Is a different combo than I don't know if that came across over the mic. But there's different rhythms to different attacks, and depending on the structure they're using, you can kind of tell what they're trying to do. Very important here. So I earlier I showed you the control range of Rumble, in which you can directly manipulate structures. So you can manipulate structures that are outside of your FOV. You can't see them. You can still use them. The problem is in the game, you can't just turn your head whenever. We are in kind of doing earthbending here. You have to look forward. You can't all willy-nilly look around. If your shoulders aren't aligned with your head, the moves aren't going to work. You're going to do the movements, but it's just going to do nothing. You can't look up either. So aerial attacks have a whole different meaning if you can't look up while doing the combos, while doing the movements. And of course, this means you have to look out for Rubble and not really attacks coming from the sides unless you're playing against a volatile player and they're using ricochets on you. But positioning is super important. So this is kind of a top-down image of a ring, of a match, right? It's a bit simplified. There's a little more space here than in an actual match. But so you have your effective area, you have your opponent's effective area. Each of you are doing movements and combos that are causing structures to move through this 3D space, but mainly along the main line in front of them. And now your goal is to try to get a structure, a rock, through their defensives and hit them. And there's things you can see, things you can't see. You can use all the structures. There's no thing where one person controls an attack. Everyone controls structures equally. So if this person were to move here towards this wall lying on the ground, they could throw it at the opponent, for example. Or they could catch this one here, could catch the ball coming at them and throw it back. Or you use it to defeat another structure. There's also the whole rock, paper, scissors thing going on. A big structure beating small structure. And this is kind of where the complexity in actual gameplay comes into Rumble. This whole spatial awareness in 3D space. How important is spatial awareness in fighting games? And
it is the entire game, I would say. A good majority of it.
So it's trying to stay outside of your opponent's attack range and still getting hits in. What's the important part there?
So this position would be called neutral in a fighting game because neither player has a significant advantage. It's just you're in a neutral position. But this range, I guess, would be analogous to footsies. Footsies, essentially, you want to walk right at the edge of your opponent's range, and then when they miss, or whiff, as we call it, you want to punish them for it. So if they, let's say they throw, it takes a while to summon a wall, I assume. Or it takes a little bit longer than a rock,
Yes,
let's say. Let's
exactly.
say you're playing your smaller boulders, I assume. Or smaller rocks, smaller
Yeah.
structures. You could punish them for going for a slow move with a fast move because they predicted where you were going to go wrong and you tricked them with your movement or etc.
Exactly. For Rumble, you have, because all of your attacks are indirect. You can't punch your opponent, as I said earlier. You see someone's summoning a structure before they use it in a certain way. So you
Exactly.
see someone summoning a cube, and then they can use it in very different ways, depending on the combo they use on it. They can make it spin towards you, they can make it fly in the air at you. And you really need to kind of predict what they are going to do and try to react. I have, there's my baiting slide. I had one right here. We're gonna go back to the other one. This one kind of shows what I mean a bit. So you have the straight line attacks, the combos. However, the player isn't restricted to moving in a straight line. They can move in curves. And if I launch an attack at my opponent, where they're standing right now, they're just gonna move past it and not get hit by it. So I need to predict where they're gonna go, launch a structure that way in a way where it doesn't influence them too much from changing their movement and reacting to what I'm doing. You have this reaction time difference where you can see what your opponent is doing and planning to do. How fast do you have to react in fighting games? And I assume it's really quick compared to this because you have to wait, for the structure to cross the distance. Tell me about it.
So reaction time is significantly less of a factor in fighting games.
Oh,
Most
really?
moves are not reactable. There are exceptions, of course, and I would say on average the fastest reaction time you're going to have is about 18 frames, which is, how many is that in millisecond? 18 divided by 60 is, what's that, quick? About 3/10 of a second.
Okay.
That's probably the fastest you're going to reasonably react. That's, for example, if you're a Guilty Gear player, that would be ABBA's Jealous Rage Overhead, or Tap Dust is 21 frames, so that's a little over a third of a second. So generally speaking, reactable moves somewhere between 18 to 30 something frames.
Okay.
But most moves come out, I would say, within 14 frames, and those moves are not reactable at all. They're reactable on recovery, so after the move is used, generally either you're going to block it, where you'll have more rock, paper, scissors because you're blocking, or they're going to whiff, and you can punish them for whiffing.
Okay. So it's a real rapid fire thing going on.
Yep, even in slower games, generally speaking, you can't react to the startup of things.
Interesting. We have a kind of a unique situation here in Rumble where just by the nature of how the game is run, in which case we have one host and one client, and there's a ping difference. Depending on the ping, if you're not hosting, reacting to things is gonna be almost impossible, especially fast-moving attacks. You have to move kind of based on a prediction of what your opponent is gonna do, of what the structures are gonna do, how the physics are gonna resolve, and input your moves before they need to happen because of the ping. And really that's kind of where a lot of high-level players shine, in that prediction area, not in the actual reaction area.
Yep.
I said before that flick and hold add curves to the game, which is really, now that you're kind of seeing it from above, maybe you see why that's a big deal, where you can really change your attack vector a lot. And if you can avoid the whole rock, paper, scissors thing, which is sometimes gonna really fuck you up. It's kind of a prisoner's dilemma sometimes, where, okay, if you attack, it's gonna break the opponent's structure, but it's also gonna break your structure, and then you're back to zero, you're back to neutral. So you gotta try to kind of get around that without your opponent getting around that first. Hold and flick gives you a nice option here of adding kind of curves to the movement. Are there any, how linearly most character attacks? Are there a lot of curves in there as well, or is that more of a rarity, depending on...
In 2D games, there are maybe vertical curves, but primarily almost everything is straight. That's going to be very linear. However, in Tekken, for example, which is a 3D game, you can walk and step to the side, and that's really important because you can dodge certain moves in the 3D space.
Yeah.
So, for example, one jab, which is a jab with your left hand, because it's curved to the right, you can step it to the left, and by doing that, you get out of the way of the move without just moving backwards.
That's something, losing space. And how bad is losing space in the fighting?
Really bad. You do not want to be in the corner, whatever you can do.
Why?
So in the corner, you moving backwards is one of your strongest tools because it means that your opponent can miss their move, right? They're gonna understand the range and they're gonna miss. If you're in the corner, your opponent can move backwards and you can't. So your opponent is gonna have all the advantage. Plus, in the corner, they're gonna have better combos because there's a wall there.
In Rumble, it's even a bit. I'd say it's even more important for your positioning and your distance to your opponent, because I said earlier that damage is kind of, or if an impact happens or not, is determined by relative speed, relative velocity. So if moving backwards is even more valuable, because now it's where you are actually defusing an attack just by moving backwards. It just kind of bounces off of you if you do the right timing. I had to do this a lot. There's kind of an advanced technique where you use a backstep to take dodge at the same time as kind of if you diffuse the opponent's attack by changing your relative speed to that. You get pushed back, and I do it at an angle, so I really try to not use this while facing my opponent, but to the side, so I don't lose as much space backwards, and still get the benefit of side dodging it at the same time, and the relative speed change. I'm still working on kind of implementing it, especially against high speed combos, because we do a lot of follow-ups. That's gonna be very familiar to you, I assume, because you need to control the pace of the battle if you want to win. Because structures take so long to cross the distance between players, you have time to launch 2 other attacks before the first one hits. And tell me about follow-ups and what you would consider combos in fighting games.
Follow-ups is a big group, but I'll try to keep it simple.
All right,
combos are. Oh, sorry. Continue.
I was just gonna see if I can further. No, give me a very brief, rough overview, and then we can dive into more specific topics in there.
Okay, I'll just focus on Okizeme then. Okizeme is the concept of hitting your opponent while they're getting up from being knocked down on the ground.
Yes.
Which is kind of similar to hitting someone after you just hit them in Rumble, I assume.
Yes, you get knocked back a bit, and you are in a state where you slide along the ground or in the air, and can summon structures.
Wonderful. So in Okizeme, after you do a knockdown, your opponent is forced into a state where they will get up at an exact same time every time, which means you can hit them the exact frame they're standing up, which is called a meaty. And because of that, you can get some advantage on their block, and you basically get to play your game because they are forced to block.
Yes. It's you're limiting their options, forcing them to be defensive, and I assume that's some of the safest places to be in a super offensive kind of pace where your opponent doesn't have the time to attack at all.
Exactly.
So we don't have true knockdowns or hit stuns in Rumble. You can still do things while you're getting knocked around. Being a knockback is bad, but I don't think it's as bad as being truly knocked down in a fighting game. We also don't have a button you press and you're just safe from normal attacks. I don't know how universal is blocking in most games. So 80% of attacks or 99%?
The majority of fighting games rely on a high-low system or a low-mid system if you're playing Tekken. But essentially, you can block high attacks, which are usually jumping attacks or designated overheads, while standing. And you can block low attacks, which are little kicks at your feet, while crouching. And you can block mids, which are just moves that hit both high and low in either direction.
Okay, makes sense. So you're blocking either low or high, or mid and low. I'll cover what we do. You can kind of cover low by summoning a cube, which protects everything up to your level. Then you get your core, almost your chest level, and there's different ways. I'll get into defense more later, but that's definitely an interesting thing we're gonna talk about still. Are there any? So looking at this picture, you have rubble lying on the ground, which actively changes the way you have to move and position yourself and that kind of stuff. Are there any things that come to mind where players are setting up their own environment or environmental hazards for the other player or for themselves?
Absolutely. So you can do things. There are certain characters that we would call trap characters that literally set up traps on the ground or in the air for your opponent to run into. I think
Yes.
of Cagliostro in Grand Blue. She puts little things in the air and on the ground that if you walk into, you get stabbed with some spears.
Okay.
But
Right.
there's also, I think of Akiha in Melty Blood. She throws this fireball that stays out for a long time, so she can act while the fireball is spinning, and your opponent can't do anything about it. They just have to try to dodge it.
Okay. So it's kind of. Do they risk hitting themselves? But with those hazards.
I'm sure there are examples, but they're very rare.
Okay. So most of the time, you're not gonna take up your own space by doing in.
Well, I'll give you one example. There are characters that can build walls. I'm thinking Crusader and DNF Duel, and he can't go through the wall, but neither can his opponent, which
okay.
can theoretically affect him. It's definitely possible.
Okay. I'm saying this because the structures on the ground, well, they can be used by anyone, and Rumble, it's really easy to damage yourself in this game. Something that's,
Ooh.
I'm sure, not as often done in normal fighters. You can, if you have a wall and you try to throw it at your opponent, if the edge of the wall hits you, you're gonna hit yourself. If you
This is Smash Brothers.
do you damage yourself in Smash Brothers with your own attacks?
You definitely can. A lot of projectiles, such as I'm thinking Snake's grenades or Diddy Kong's banana. Snake's grenades can blow up and hit him, but also a lot of characters can catch your projectiles and throw it back at you.
Okay, it's kind of
That's
that,
similar.
I guess. It's also if you dash into your own structures, if they're lying on the ground, or if you're holding them, can damage you if you are doing it wrong. I am sadly in the situation where most of the things I have the most fun in this game really risky if they don't hit or if they don't work. Where I want to surprise my opponents when they are using an attack. I will dash into the attack to fuck with their timing on the reaction, because they expect me to react later than I actually do, because it gets into my range earlier. It helps me attack faster and break their pacing and their control of the pace. But if I miss the actual move, underline my reaction time because of the ping, I just effectively dash into a wall, which is not, it's ill-advised, I will say, for normal combat. Right. Let's see. Right, something that's kind of interesting that I wanted to cover, come on, there we go, is because forces are applied in a straight line in front of you, right? I said that earlier. If you do a combo, it's gonna move in a straight line forward. Because you are in 3D space and you can turn, come on, there we go. You can really manipulate your environment, and even though if I shoot forward with either of these balls in my attack range, the blue ones, I'm gonna miss the ball in front of me, the one outside of my range. However, if I turn, I can now manipulate the balls in line with my line of sight and actually hit the ball.
Makes sense.
This is a riddle or a task we give a lot of new players to try to kind of solve this problem where, I'm trying to get this structure, but I'm so limited by my options. No, you're not. You have a lot of creativity. You just gotta move with the structures, and that, especially combined with your field of view, where you would not see the rightmost blue ball with your field of view, but you can still manipulate it. If you are aware of your range of action control, you can do a lot of plays that wouldn't be possible without that awareness, which is why I wanted to show it here. And see, do we want to do the baiting and conditioning slide before or after the defense one?
I don't. Whatever works for you.
Alright, I'm gonna talk about what defensive options we have before we can talk about how to kind of try to get around them and bait them out of people. Because we have a lot of defensive options. So there's 3 main ways of defending. We can parry something, ground it, and hold it. I have a little clip on the next slide that shows that pretty well. Point is, those are the defensive options that are gonna stop most objects moving at you, or rather one object at a time. And then there's different options for structure interactions. Basically, if something is moving towards you with the speed of one straight, if you use a straight on it, it's gonna kind of negate it and it's gonna stop moving. Plus minus 1 equals 0, or 1 plus... Wait, 1 minus 1 equals 0. You stop it from moving, and you also push yourself backwards. You can block by forcing structure interactions, hide behind a wall. pretty easy to understand. There's a more complex mechanic called Hitstop deflection, which allows you to do waterbending in this earthbending game. I know, silly. And Deadstops. You stop something from moving no matter how strong it is. And explosions also move stuff around. Yourself or structure. You can use that defense. For movement, because we're in a VR game and your hitbox is determined by your actual body, you can just duck and move in real life to change the size of your hitbox for defense. I throw a lot of walls at a specific angle that a friend of mine has figured out how to duck underneath consistently, and it's driving me insane. It's very effective if you can actually predict what your opponent's going to do. But it's because you commit to it and you're breaking your stance, you can't do any other combos, any movements while ducking. It's high commitment defense. Next one, positioning. Don't be where the enemy's going to attack. Pretty self-explanatory. And evasion, there's different options of actually dodging, not just defending. These are to me, those are a lot of options, especially when you're trying to get through someone else's defense. How many defensive options are there in your usual fighting games? And I guess, how do you try to get around them?
So I would say most modern games at this point have 3 primary defensive options, right? Besides movement, obviously. You can jump and dash and such. But your very traditional, oh god, I'm already blocking defense is just blocking. There's usually your character
low block and high block, right?
Yep. Usually your character has some sort of invincible option, such as some characters have it meterlessly, some characters have to spend some meter. You might hear the term Dragon Punch or DP. That's a kind of colloquial term for an anti-air that's invincible. Or most games have some sort of guard cancel, where you cancel your block stun into a reversal attack, but if that move is blocked, same with or an invincible reversal. If it's blocked, you'll be minus a lot, and you will be punished very hard.
Okay, so we don't have invincibility. Well, we do kind of. It's not a move we do. It's a weird interaction you can force basically to gain a very small invincibility frame. Also for structures too, but there's a lot because it's physics based. There's a lot you can do, and I feel that kind of that, and plus that there's only the indirect attacks gives a lot of strength to the person defending, a big advantage to the person defending. How do you balance kind of offense and defense, keeping on the pressure and keeping your own defense high? How do you think?
So there's a couple different ways to do it. I would say in more traditional games, your offense is very similar to what you're doing in neutral, but your opponent is at a big disadvantage because they can't walk backwards. So you walk kind of outside of their range and then walk into their range, and if they miss, then you get a free punish, and if not, so they are the ones who has to commit, essentially, to get out. So that's the big thing on offense, is you're understanding your opponent is the one that has to commit. In anime games, which tend to be a lot faster and have more plus frames on block, if your opponent blocks a move of yours, you act first. So you're going to have a lot more chances to do weird, crazy setups that they're not going to be able to escape.
So you said plus frame earlier. Can you explain that?
Yes. So when you block an attack, you are stuck in a position called block stun, which is just you can't do anything while you're blocking. And your opponent is stuck in a position, is stuck in the recovery of their move. So, after they do an attack, it has a little bit of recovery before you can do another move. On block, some moves are plus, which means that the attacker recovers first, and they can attack again first. And some moves are minus, which means that the defender finishes their block stun first and can attack first.
Okay, so it's kind of a trying to predict if they're going to block or not, and then trying to, I guess, bait out those that gives you an advantage frame-wise.
Well, it's more you're playing RPS after the block.
Okay, so you have an advantage recovering from the block or the attack, depending.
Yep.
Okay, so the pressure, I guess, trying to pick up the pressure is on the defending.
For example,
is on the attacking side.
Yes, the defender is the one taking risk.
Yes.
For example, in Grand Blue, most characters have a +4 close light, which means their jab right up close is they have 4 extra frames of when they can move before their opponent can. And during that time, that means that you're really susceptible to what's called strike throw. When you're blocking, you're not able to dodge throws. You have to press a certain special input to dodge throws. And if you are scared of getting hit, you're going to keep blocking, and then you're going to get thrown.
Okay.
And vice versa.
So you can get grabbed defending.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to show some actual examples. This is the parry, ground, and slingshot. Those are the defensive options I mentioned earlier. you can stop a structure from moving just in the air. You can make it go down to the ground and then send it back. It stops all movement forward. It just turns it in downward movement. And then slingshot here is just a hold straight where you catch something and send it back. If you miss the timing, it's gonna hit you. But if you don't, it's a really nice, attack as counter. These have different cooldowns of the moves. So 0.3 seconds for the parry, 0.3 seconds for the ground, and 0.8 seconds for the hold. They're all independent, so you can't really... I parry the first attack, I ground the second one, and then I use hold on the third attack, and then I can go back to parrying. How much is this 0.3 second cooldown in comparison to your fighting game experience?
That would be, I guess, analogous to the recovery of a move. Generally, let's think about it. 3/10 of a second is about... What did I say that was? That was 18 frames?
Something like that.
That is pretty fast for move recovery. It depends on the move, of course. But that's pretty fast because it's really hard to punish people for doing that if they miss. Because generally speaking, think about the difference between if I block a move, it might be -2, meaning my opponent has 2 frames, which I can't punish. My opponent is 2 frames slower than me, which means I can't hit them for doing it. But if they miss, they might be -30 theoretically because I'm not blocking. If they have 30 frames of recovery, I can just hit them for doing that.
Okay, so it's small enough to be negligible, to not be relevant for...
Let me look up real quick. There's a move I'm thinking of. I'm trying to think of what the recovery on this move is. Give me 1 second. It's a Slayer's Far Slashing Guilty Gear Strive, which is very fast and famously unpunishable. 13 frames. Okay, that's much faster than I thought. It has 13 frames of recovery, which is a little bit faster than 0.3. That is not not reactable. You can't whiff punish the move.
It's really hard to... Defense is strong, like I said earlier. Every 0.3 seconds you can ground a structure or parry a structure. Theoretically, you still have to move your body. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't move in 0.3 seconds reacting to different structures. I might do, but it's different positions. So it's not just an instant input. Here's an example of how you can move. It's a 3D space. If you do it right, it's really hard to get hit just by moving left and right. And come on, let me pause the video. Something you might be observing here is that you get pushed back with every attack you do, basically. Every attack you do costs you a little bit of space. That's a movement option as well. It's a backwards movement option and something you need to counter and you have to keep an active mind. You'll see that the person attacking is getting further away from the person defending in little chunks. Probably not that easy to see. But if you attack, you lose a little bit of space as well. I wonder if that's... it is relevant as well. It can be depending on the matchup with the opponent. Let me see. Right, so is this kind of... I guess this is more of dodging than actual footsies, right? Because you're trying to stay out of your opponent's range. Or would, in this case, be the left and right movement. Unaligning yourself and aligning yourself with line of fire. Would that be kind of footsies? Okay.
Kind of.
Alright, so go more into movement. This is another example of this knockback that you apply to yourself. You get pushed back if you attack. This is me dodging an opponent's attack by summoning a disc and straighting it, so shooting it forward, and that in turn pushes me backwards. It's a very quick movement here, so I'll play it again. It's just the cube comes at me, I shoot a disc, you can see it impact the wall here. There you go. If I go by frame, you can see me reacting to it coming towards me, aligning my line of attack sideways, and then shooting out a disc, which pushes me backwards and out of the attack range of the cube, which would have normally hit me here. So this is, I guess, something I do a lot, kind of bait out attacks, and then use this backstab method to take a little distance forwards, backwards as soon as they attack, to have more time to react to their attacks, and to just throw off their timing and their follow-up attack. So I guess that would be a good footsie example as well in Rumble.
A backdash or sidestep in Tekken.
Right, another movement, this is similar, except I'm chaining together a jump as well in this example. So he's going to throw a wall at me, and I'm going to throw a disc and jump to dodge the incoming attack. So you have a lot of options again. I turn, you can see my health bar kind of turn where I'm looking, and then I shoot the disc, and it hits it here, and then jump backwards. So a lot of defensive movement options here, a lot of stuff you can do. I'm going to go into Deadstops and Hitstops for a second. Hitstops basically means, ooh, big graphic, nah, don't worry about it. It's just, this is the collision mechanic of two structures hitting each other. If one structure hits another structure, it's going to stop moving for a second. Like a dramatic pause in a kung fu movie or something, where you see if the attack actually did anything, and then it resolves. And this kind of dramatic pause, during that impact moment, before they break, the structure is, or both structures, invincible for very few, like for a couple of frames. I don't know how much exactly, because a lot of this is community research. It's not developer published information, and trying to test the invincibility frame of a structure is kind of difficult timing wise. But I guess we could do the work at some point. So in this case, the wall hits the pillar. A wall in this case is 4 points worth of attack. A pillar is 2, 4 is bigger than 2, it breaks the pillar. You can't affect a structure while it's breaking another structure, so in this invincibility time. So if your opponent, for example, has a wall in front of you and tries to use a long combo on it to attack you, but in the middle of the combo you hit the wall with the disc, it's going to stop moving for just, a little bit during this hit stop, and then if they do any inputs during the hit stop, it's not going to go through.
I see.
So here is an example of a dead stop. Again, for the values, he's going to throw a wall, and the wall is going to obviously break a pillar in normal gameplay. Is that it has a value of 4, the pillar has a value of 2 in this case, but what actually happens is a disc gets thrown out and hits the pillar, which turns it into a hit stun, and in that time it's invincible for just a bit, and the wall just bounces off. Again, a clip by Dizzy, who explained the mechanic to me. So you see how close the impacts are here. You can do some really fun stuff with it, and this is also the basis for waterbending, for basically moving one structure with another structure. I'll show some examples of that in just a little bit. So you already mentioned that there are invincibility frames sometimes in your games on certain defensive moves or on certain attacks. How does that impact how you approach an exchange?
So the big thing about invincible moves is that they are super punishable. So if you miss it or your opponent blocks it, you will die, which is very different from this situation. But I will say it is kind of similar to, I guess we would call it hit stun. What's the word for it? Basically, if you hit something with a move that has a lot of hit stun, that has a hurt box but is not your opponent, then the hurt box will stay around for a little bit longer, and they'll get hit by it too. So there's a really good example. Let me see if I can find. I don't think I'll be able to find a clip in time, but I'll maybe send it to you later.
Yeah,
where in Guilty Gear Strive, Ramlethal has a move called Mortabato, which is this big explosion with her swords. And there's a character named Jacko who summons these little minions. If Ramlethal hits the minions with Mortabato, the hitbox to hit Jacko will stay around for a really long time, and the Jacko will usually run into the hitbox and get hit way after the move has happened.
Okay, it causes some unexpected interaction sometimes, because you have to predict what your opponent's doing. You have to predict how the physics are going to turn up. Is this going to end up in my area of effect or not? So trying to do a kind of physics simulation and then suddenly something goes wrong is really good for throwing off your opponent. It's not that it goes wrong, but if Dizzy here was positioned a bit more to the left, the disc would not be visible because it would be blocked by the pillar and the wall. So while you could bait someone out to throw a stronger structure and then strengthen it for just a little bit with this invincibility frame. It's really difficult to do. But you can still do it consistently if you have the skill for it.
I found a really good example I just sent to you. I'm not sure if you can pull it up, but I think it's really funny. It's a really good example.
Maybe I can. Let's see.
My opponent was not very happy about this one.
Let me I'll pull it up. Let me just add a slide to the presentation here.
I can also send you more examples of stuff later if you want.
Sure. I might link there. So I have included it to the slides. Right. So here's your example. Okay. So tell me what's happening.
So as you can see, Ramlethal has these big swords, and Jacko has these little minions. So what happens is Ram hits the minion with that big move that's called, oh my goodness, Sabrabato, yes. And the hitbox stays around because the big slam hit the minion. So if you want to go slow in that, it might be easier to understand.
Then, I assume.
Yep.
So the minion.
So Jacko's going to hit the minion toward me. I'm going to hit the minion with the swords. But see, Jacko is out of range, so I won't hit her. However,
Yes.
because I hit the minion, the hitbox is still there. And she's gonna get hit by nothing.
Okay. So it kind of delays it. It's also a
Exactly.
action as well, for sure. Let's see. What's next? Right, waterbending. I love waterbending. Basically, another clip by Dizzy. Wonderful work. We have an example here of a boulder, huge structure, a lot of damage, and she's gonna deflect it with a cube, which is a lot weaker than a boulder. Now this is a bit of a special example because it's not just waterbending; it's also a dead stop. But basically, the opponent throws the boulder, and she just bounces it off, hits it away, and then follows up by knocking herself backwards enough to not get hit by the ball anymore. So what's happening here is hitting the cube, the boulder, causes the hit stun, the short moment where the game is trying to figure out which structure is going to break. And during that time, while you're still in contact, you can push another structure. And that kind of turns it into a ricochet then, when you bounce off another structure. And so you can, if you time it right, and have the right angles, you can push a really big structure with small ones and use that as it's a lot of fun doing this in the game. It's difficult, as most things are in Rumble, but because this is a flick move, because you have all the control about the position and the rotation of the object, you can, I think there's hold and flick combined to get even more control. Yes, it is. There's a couple different things playing into this, but that's kind of an example of where this hit stun effect, this hit stop, gets another use in the community. Right. Next up, while we are at the movement, and we skipped a topic earlier, which is the baiting and conditioning. So now you've kind of seen what all defensive options we have in Rumble, right? Just dodging out of the way, weaving around attacks, either parry something, grounding something, waterbending something out of the way. How am I gonna hit my opponent? Do you have any advice?
I mean, if they commit to something, then you're going to hit them for doing that, because you know what they're going to do.
So aerial attacks, I think, a great example of this, because you have to commit to the jump, and you can't summon any structures while in the air. I mean, you're an earthbender, you're not going to pull a wall out of thin air. It's got to come out of the ground. So that's a big commitment for the attack. Of course, walls and bigger structures have more of a commitment as well. How do you think about kind of manipulating your opponent in a game?
Oh, it's everything. It's the entire skill of the game, I would say. In terms of how you actually do it, I would say my personal strategy is that I am a very flowchart heavy player, and I don't mean that in the derogatory way. I mean that I like to have a really dense understanding of exactly how I can punish my opponent when I know what they're going to do. So if I know my opponent wants to mash after this move, I'm going to know exactly how to punish it.
Okay, so do you see certain tells that they're gonna do what you expect them to do? Or do you just, on good faith, because they did it already, then execute on what you think they're gonna do?
Very rarely will you see a physical tell, but I mean, it definitely is a factor. But generally speaking, it's more of a habit. After this certain move, they have to press, or after this, they expect me to throw them, so that means I'm going to not throw them and I'm going to mash. It's more about the pure psychological mind game of it than any physical things.
How different the ways people have these habits on a high level and a low level? On a high level, are people on the same character going to have similar habits? Is it very different, very similar?
So they'll have some similar habits. I mean, every player kind of falls into certain habits that are kind of similar, but generally speaking, even on a low level, people's habits are kind of different, but the difference is how well do you mask them and how quick do you change them.
Yeah. So do you try to fake habits sometimes?
You can, absolutely.
So it's all about those mind games. What's your opponent think you're gonna do? What do you think they're gonna do based on what they think you're gonna do? I think prediction, I said earlier, is super important also in this game because of the ping. I mean, I have pretty good ping onto my server. So it's 20 ping.
Oh, that's not bad at all. That's good.
And then sometimes you're fighting against people with 250 ping, which is a lot, especially if you're fighting across another server. If I'm fighting someone in the US, that's a huge delay where I need to predict what my opponent. What do you think about basic strategies very simple strategies, are they going to do well or less well in this kind of mind game heavy surrounding environment?
I would say you can play very simple and still be effective as long as you are thinking about risk and reward. So you can play a very simple kind of binary game where you're very heavy on strike throw and you just make it impossible to tell whether you're going to strike or throw. You can also play very linearly. You can play very aggressive. You can play super defensive. You could play a zoner that doesn't let your opponent get in the whole game. Or you could play a rushdown character that has no range but hits you really hard when they get in. And so you can play very simply and still be playing very well as long as you aren't taking big risks.
Okay, so it's about the risk more than the actual complexity of the play.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So in Rumble, you have a limit to how fast you can react on your body movements, because you have to not just press a button, you have to move your body. But you can also see the movements your opponent is doing, and so that definitely helps in predicting if you have line of sight to them. I will also say for defensive options, we have a lot of defensive options, but players will specialize in 3 at a time. So if you know which 3 they're going to use mainly, you can kind of play around that a lot, depending on the weaknesses and strengths of the movements of the defenses. Do you think having physics in the game makes it easier or harder to what's going to happen?
I would say harder, because fighting games are very deterministic.
It's animation against animation, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you break your own patterns if you do recognize them, or a habit you recognize? Do you have an approach to that?
So sometimes you don't want to necessarily do the opposite. So let's say, I keep mashing there, let me block, because that might be what your opponent expects you to do. Sometimes you just want to say, okay, I'm playing. Sometimes you want to reset rather than change, if that makes sense. You want to go back to kind of your neutral, safe position if you're playing too risky. Or the opposite, if you're playing too safe, you might want to take a bigger risk that your opponent's not expecting.
Okay, so we should think in terms of risk on high or low risk. How do you evaluate how risky something?
Generally in terms of kind of raw numbers. So let's say the simplest example is, should I go for a throw here, right? Because throws generally do low damage, but it depends on the game. Because in some games, throws give you a really good position because you get a hard knockdown. And some games and some characters, you don't get a really good position off your throw. So you might say, okay, the risk is I get hit and I take a lot of damage, or I throw them and they take not a lot of damage. So you're like, the throw is not that worthwhile in this position. But of course, it's much more nuanced and complex than that, because it's also about positioning. If I do this throw, how close will they be to the corner? Or it's also about conditioning. You might say, well, if I throw them here, they're going to be more scared of throw, which means I'll get a higher punish later.
So how does it play into this who's on the attacking and defending side? So if I'm on the defense right now, how should I think about risks and rewards?
So defense is the same thing, mitigating risk and maximizing reward. But of course, you are almost always going to be taking more risks because you're on the back foot. So generally speaking, you want to do what's called option selects, which are complicated sets of inputs that defeat multiple things at once. So a good example is delay teching. All you have to do to delay tech is wait a little bit longer than normal and then press your throw tech, which is your throw break button. And basically what that does, if your opponent hits you, then you'll block because you're blocking. And if they throw you, you'll tech the throw.
Okay. So trying to counter many options at the same time, or as many as you can.
Exactly. So I sent you another clip if you want to pull that up too,
I'll
real
pull
quick.
as well.
Show you an example of what offense and defense can look.
All right. I have pulled it up.
So there's lots of going on here, but I'll keep it simple.
Okay. So you're on the attacking side.
Yep.
You're pushing someone against a corner.
So you see, there's a good example of footsies. I keep running in and out of Samson's range there, and so I'm +2 here, or +1, excuse me.
Yes. So you're going out of the range during this attack.
Yep. And then I run in, I cancel it, and then here I am minus. I forget. I haven't played this character in forever. But I'm minus a bit, and then I run back in. But they're scared of me canceling it. They whiff, see, but I'm a little too slow to punish it.
Yep.
I backdash again. I walk in a little, and then I walk back just perfectly, and then I punish them for doing that.
Yes. Okay. So you have a lot more room to go back and forth with your footsies.
Exactly.
That makes a huge difference in this one.
And at the very beginning, my opponent is blocking this little sword toss here. In between there are 3 options essentially: jump, throw, or press a button. So my opponent kind of has to guess what option am I going to do, and I guessed what they were going to do, which was jump, because that's the least risky.
Okay.
And I punished them for it with their throw.
So this sounds a lot something like chess, where you are.
Yes, it's high-speed chess.
This is what it feels like sometimes as well in Rumble, where a very kind of common situation, at least in my play style, is you have two characters, me and my opponent, and we're both dashing towards a cube somewhere in the middle of it. And because if two people straight a cube at the same time, it blows up. It gets destroyed. You normally, the best option isn't to straight, but if you don't straight it, your opponent can straight it.
I see.
Which means you have to account for the option of them straighting it at you without straighting. And there's a lot of different things you can do. You can cube launch it, so summon another thing under it to push it up. An uppercut does not cancel with a straight, so it doesn't destroy anything. Or you can kind of, if your opponent does straight it, you can backstep to bait it out, so the timing doesn't align anymore. So your straight doesn't destroy it anymore because it's at the same time. So you get them on the rebound by doing little footsies, baiting out that attack. That's at least why I, most of the time, get a similar experience to what's happening here, at least in the kind of baiting out and accounting for multiple option aspect. Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about the multiple options part directly. I do it. For example, walls are great problem solvers, or boulders, because it's a big as hammer. It's gonna blast through most things, and even if it doesn't connect, it's gonna destroy some of the structures that are in between you and your opponent, or some of their attacks, and kind of defending and attacking at the same time. Right. I wanted to cover movement option. Right, here we go. So there's several options, and you can combine them. You can just walk, joystick movement. You can sprint, joystick movement but faster. Dashing, short burst towards a certain direction. Also, 3D space. Jumping, launches it upwards, and then push back. You do a move, and you get pushed back. And here's a very kind of small clip here of different movement options. If it's not that readable, it's not that big of a problem. But you see, there's a lot of different options for different speeds. I made a little chart. It's not completely accurate, but it's fairly accurate. You have a lot of forward movement options. Overall, 4. You can walk, you can sprint, you can dash, and you can dash jump, which launches you a good distance forward, but you're in the air, which makes you vulnerable. However, for backwards movement, you have a lot more options. You have the pushback from a straight, from combining pushback, a disc straight. There's something called a mojo dash, where you use that while... it's complicated to explain right now. However, it's a very fast boost backwards that doesn't lift you off the ground. Very useful. And then disc jump, backwards jump basically, and a speed disc jump, a fast backwards jump. For some reason, most of the mobility is backwards in this game. It's because that's not really combining these velocities. I don't think this was ever really intended that way. This was all discovered by the community. And what movement options do you have in your games? And what does having mostly backwards options, or the best movement options being backwards, what does that mean to you when you hear that?
So we have the exact opposite, where forward movement is significantly stronger than backwards movement. And I should say in terms of speed and distance, not in terms of gameplay strength.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that if you could just move backwards really fast forever, it would be impossible to hit someone. So generally speaking, if you're running at someone, you're moving faster than they can move backwards, which means they have to commit to stop you from coming in.
I mean, also, your games require contact to do damage.
Exactly.
So you need to get two players close together, otherwise the game's gonna take forever.
Exactly.
Here you're trapped in an arena with someone else. You can't, even if you have a lot of backwards movement, it's still a lot. It gets you a far distance. It's because you're doing it backwards. Some of these things feel like you're launching yourself backwards out of a cannon. Some people are really good at using them and then kind of just turning around in the right moment, so that you're not going backwards anymore, you're going forwards suddenly. It's not that intuitive though. It's interesting, I think, how most movement is backwards. It's great for distance control, kind of giving up space or repositioning yourself, but it just takes time. It's a lot of options for movement. Ignoring flight and fast movement for now. So we're kind of, right now, people keep developing new moves and combos for Rumble. It started, you saw in the beginning with the trailer, kind of just throw rocks at each other, basic rock interactions. At some point we developed flight and rail guns, where we use the hit stun mechanics to launch something very fast. And among other things, people keep finding new techniques. And it's interesting where we're going to go with Rumble. How much discovery is there in fighting games? I mean, fighting games have been a thing for such a long time, while Rumble, or rather this type of genre of VR game, hasn't been a thing for very long. It's still developing, it's still growing. How's this technique development or technique discovery? How did that happen in fighting games, and where did it go?
It's I would say it's infinite. I mean, people have been discovering new things for years and years and years, even in games that are decades old. I mean, Smash Brothers Melee is the same age as me, actually. I think it's older than me. And people are still coming up with new characters that can be played viably. And Donkey Kong won a major. It's, well, how is that possible? That character was supposed to be low tier, and now he's really good. So I would say development continues forever.
I think it really depends on the community, if it's committed enough or not. And I think something that's pretty special here and in the time we live in is people share clips of moves they got. They share notation of how they did it. It's hard to say you did a kick, uppercut, kick, straight, uppercut, jump, dash. That's a lot. So they use notation instead to sum it up. And then, post an explanation of the move and a little video of how to do it, what it does. That kind of sharing of knowledge is pretty huge. Also partially because we don't have characters. We have one set of movesets. They can be modified by Shiftstones. There's a couple of options here. You select two of these, basically, up to two of these. Oftentimes I go without any stones, just because I want to train my fundamentals. There's defensive options. There's boost to your abilities. A double jump, stronger explosion knockback, or a charge attacks that go a little faster. And then on-hit effects. Basically, you hit someone, and then the next time you get hit, you have a little damage reduction, or a damage boost on the next hit you do, or you heal a little after a set amount of attacks. So we don't have set characters. We have kind of a very big freedom in which way we want to pursue the different branches of the game. This is kind of a chart that people made to sum up different playstyles by evaluating different categories of play. How mobile is the player? How much aerial attacks do they do? How high is the spawn pace? Do they react a lot? Do they use crazy moves or just the pure basics? What's the range they usually fight at? Is there a way to compare different players in this way in fighting games, or different characters, I suppose?
Absolutely. I mean, besides characters, which are already very different and divided into different archetypes based on their range, their speed, etc., players themselves are extremely different even on the same character. Some players are really patient, they play really slow and force their opponent to be the ones to commit. Some players play extremely right in your face and aggressive. Even on characters that are zoners, they attack from far away, some players still play very, I don't know how to word this exactly, but they play aggressive. They want to be the ones who are taking the actions, whereas some will play super patient and make you run into their attack.
Yes, it's interesting. Can you kind of, if you compare different players, not by their skill, but by their style, can you tell who has a bigger advantage or disadvantage in a matchup?
I'm not sure if you could tell if there's an advantage, but you could probably identify a person by their playstyle.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I could definitely also probably identify some people by the way they fight in Rumble. What do you think about the fact that we don't have different movesets? We only have one character, basically. How would fighting games be different if there was only one character that could do a lot of things?
I'm not sure if that space has really been explored in traditional fighting games, but I suppose you can think of games where a lot of the characters are similar, but have different strengths and weaknesses. Those certainly exist. Where a lot of characters just kind of have Fireball, Advancing Move, Anti-Air as their basic setup. I guess it is kind of similar in some ways to, I guess, Tekken, where a lot of characters have huge, 200 plus move lists, but, what moves you choose to use kind of changes how you play the character.
I gotcha. And 200. Did you say 200?
I think King is the longest one. I know that. King's move list. Let me know. King Tekken. I believe he has over 200. I could be wrong.
That's insane.
In Tekken 8, which I think shortened it. Let me check Tekken.
I mean, to be fair, in Rumble, it doesn't make sense to count anymore because different structures interact differently.
Does it say how much on here? How many moves does he have? I'm sorry, he doesn't have 200. He has 186 different moves.
That's still a lot. That's still a lot. So you said before that you're kind of the chart kind of player, where you try to get a flow chart. Do you do that before you fight a certain player, or do you do that while playing?
Both.
Well, what's the advantage and disadvantage of either?
So the advantage is that if my skill at reading what my opponent's going to do and conditioning works off, then my punishing is very consistent and very strong. It also means that I'm very prepared for almost any situation. However, it also means I'm not prepared for my opponent to do quote unquote unoptimal or more creative things, and therefore I'm
Yeah.
going to be a little more off guard when my opponent does something I'm not expecting.
I think against very creative players in Rumble, it's very hard to do a prediction chart of someone because the options are so many. I mean, you could probably do it because they only use a certain amount, but creative players can use a lot of very different styles. I'm gonna go to the different kind of styles we have, the main styles, if there's even such a thing. Basically, specialization. People specialize in different things. Specialize in ricochets, specialize in flight, specialize in waterbending. A little list here. In the middle, kind of being the fundamental playstyle, where you just do the basics but do them really well and really well executed. Waterbending would be, deflecting structures with other structures, explosions, volatile playstyle, using knockback on structures against your opponent, against other structures, against yourself. A charge to use the boosted strengths of your moves through the charge to do unexpected attacks, flight space attacks, and then the weirdos, the rest, people that will just focus all on defense, stack 2 defensive stones, and then just dash through all your attacks and I'll do some really niche thing. I'm gonna show some clicks of different styles just so you can see how different people play. Come on, no, God, the sound. Right, this is waterbending. I mean, we already saw this clip. Just using opponent structures, deflecting them with using this stun. Charge stone, a clip by Lemios, who is gonna, so charge basically, if you hold a structure for long enough, it's gonna ding and you get a charge. You can use on the structure you're holding or another structure. Basically, if you do a charged straight, it's gonna go further than and faster than a normal straight. If you do a charged uppercut, it's gonna go further, faster and stronger and further up than a normal. Here, he parries a structure in the air, so it's charged. He has his charge. He gets the buff. He uses the space here to attack, gets the charge off on the cube, and then uses a follow-up attack on the charge attack from the air that he set up earlier. Charge is a lot about using stuff you set up beforehand in play. So is volatile. Aerial attacks often have a lot of setup time. This one was really nice because he's flying on 2 cubes, catches a 3rd cube, flies on all 3, and flies in from an awkward angle and hits them all. It's a really funny clip. It kind of shows the level of control you have if you focus on these specialized topics. I can't do that. I could if I practiced enough because I have the same moveset. And it's just specialization is something special. Then we have volatile. This is a clip compilation from Biven, one of the top players, where he uses knockback. You can see structures pushing other structures, ricocheting off them, getting weird angles, getting people from outside of their line of sight around structures. It's really strong. It's also really difficult because the volatile structures, they explode when they hit something. But your opponent can catch it and throw it back and control your structures as well. So you're giving your opponent a buff as well if they use it correctly. But it's certainly interesting. Then we have the weirdos. This is just an example of someone specializing so much. This is flight here. So he spawns a disc, jumps on the disc and flies on this tiny disc and still gets the opponent. I would bet that this is some client flight, which means he has a lot of ping while he's doing this, which is extremely difficult. People do silly things when they specialize, right? I wanted to go over a sauerkraut clip later. Maybe we'll do that. I don't want to take up too much more time. Right. I want to talk about the community a bit because Rumble is really difficult. It takes you actual physical stamina to do as well, and there's some conditions that make it kind of special. There's no skill-based matchmaking, which means basically as soon as you a black belt, which is after a couple of hours, you cleared the tutorial, you're now in the same queue as all other black belts. That means people with 300 hours, people with 1,000 hours, and people with 5 hours in the game. This is gonna be fixed, I'm pretty damn sure, in the future. We're still in early development, right? And we also don't have the player numbers right now to really make skill-based matchmaking efficient, sadly. But it makes newer players really come in contact with high-level players a lot, which lets us teach them pretty well, I think. There's an etiquette in the game. You have voice chat on, not by default, but you can turn it on, and most players have it on after a couple hours of playing the game. We have some tradition where you fist bump your opponent after a match and offer new players, to teach them combos and stuff, whatever they want to learn. And what do you think about, first, that there's no skill-based matchmaking and that there's voice chat in most matches?
In a lot of what we call poverty games, most people play in lobbies and not skill-based matchmaking because there's just not enough players. Or Discord fighters, I guess would be the other word. You meet people through Discord instead of through the matchmaking.
Yes, this is
voice chat. That's kind of scary. I would be concerned. I would be scared to turn a voice chat on. But
in normal games, yes, I would agree. The community is really nice on that sense in Rumble.
That's good.
I will say. Maybe it'll change once we get to Quest. We are hoping it does not. And we're hoping we can, not have a bunch of screaming 12-year-olds screaming slurs in the matches by, not, kind of trying to make it a wholesome community that's about teaching and sharing. And because the specialization, where everyone has the same moveset, but you can try the stuff that others are finding out, are developing, it's a good atmosphere, definitely, for teaching. It's if you want to fight against people with the same skill level, you'd usually go to the Discord we have and we'll find people of a similar rank. I have a friend group I play with often, and only sometimes do the random matches, depending on what I feel. It's definitely kind of unique. I think it's probably fairly common in smaller communities. So we have a lot of Discord servers for different topics. We have one official Discord from the makers of the game, and we have one that's more for sharing techniques and knowledge, and then we have others from creators for the game, that make videos on it, and more specialized servers on specific specializations and playstyles. And we're kind of fighting for trying to have all the knowledge in one place, or in a place where you can access it all without being in 20 different Discord servers. How is the community normally organized in your games, or what does it look like?
I would say there's two different types of organization. There's online and then local. Your local scene is probably the thing you're going to spend the most time with. It's also going to be the nicest part. I wrote a big research paper on our local scene and sort of some of the values and history of it. And essentially, I would say go to your locals more than anything else. You're going to meet people that are really nice. They're going to want to help you. But online can sometimes be really toxic, but it is kind of divided into Discord servers based on what character you play and such.
So what I think is happening here, because it's in VR and you're basically in a room with someone else, you see their body language, you hear them talking. It's a lot more personal than just having, or not even a voice chat, just a match, or even if you just have voice chat in a game. So I feel it maybe kind of emulates that local vibe in a sense in the normal play of the community of the game of Rumble. Do you think that might be true?
I definitely think so.
I think it definitely helps it. We have different servers where you mainly play. Australia, and America are the most popular ones currently, and you get to know people there. Definitely. It's you see them right now. You actually also see their outfits, and you can recognize them from their name and their voice if they do speak. Not everyone does. Right. I wanted to get to the next point, which is one of the last ones here, which is tournaments. So for us, most tournaments, not everyone, but most of them are international. They are community organized, and they go over several weeks because people play on different servers. They have a week to meet the person they're fighting against, and then they're matched up with the next person. We are dealing constantly with ping difference of host and client, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, especially on global tournaments. They are bigger. And I wanted to ask a couple questions about that. how are competitions hosted for your games? I talked about locals already and how they're organized.
So there's majors, which are the over 1,000 entrant big events. Then there's regionals, which usually have a pretty decent showing, 500. And locals usually have somewhere between 8 to 20 people. And then online events can have different sizes, but generally online events are heavily region locked, so usually North America or even just East or West Coast if you're doing that, or EU or South America, etc. And we have rollback netcode, which means our netcode's really good, but even then, the region matters a lot for ping, so anything over 120 ping and you'll probably get DQ'd.
That would make a lot of people very sad to hear in Rumble. But I think because of the distance between the players, physically, and the indirect damage, a 100 ping in a fighting game is gonna probably make you unable to function at all. I think in Rumble, though, it's still very much doable, depending on the skill level, because it's not just about speed and reaction speed, but about prediction and planning a lot. How do the tournaments usually get their prizes for the people that do win?
You buy in.
You buy in. So you have to pay a certain amount to join the tournament, and that goes to the winners. How much is it?
It depends. So let's say I'm going to a local. If I win a local, I probably get somewhere between 20 to 60 bucks for winning. But if it's a big event, I've gotten, I'm trying to think, I got $300 for winning Guilty Gala. Trying to think how much that was. I think I got 200 for fourth in the singles, and then 150 for somewhere between $300 to $400. If you win a major, you're going to get a couple thousand, but also you're spending more money to go there because first of all, signing up costs money, but then traveling across the world to go, especially if you're going to EVO, you're traveling to Las Vegas, and then it's, Street Fighter had 7,500 entrants its first year, so that's quite a lot. But it can be a lot. If you go to World Tour events, usually that's paid for by the developer of the game. For example, Capcom gives the first place at Capcom Cup for Street Fighter $1 million.
Holy shit.
But generally you're going to get, if you win a major, you're probably expecting to get somewhere in the low to mid thousands to 10,000.
That's not really something we can do with current player numbers. The buy-in would not be a lot in total, I think. But maybe that's a way we could organize our games or our tournament in the future. But
some are also free, and there's no payout. For example, online events usually have no buy-in. They're just free to play.
It's also difficult to organize international money transfers. So, how do you practice for fighting games? Do you play with other players? Do you usually train in a training area? Or is it just playing the game a lot?
I would say the two primary... I'm not a big labber, I'll say. I don't really use training mode that much. I mean, I do for certain situations, but primarily I like to learn by doing, so I mostly fight other people to practice. I would say my second biggest form of practice is VOD review. So watching, footage of my play and figuring out what I'm doing right and wrong.
When you're watching your own videos, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for not just, so a lot of people I'm trying to look at the macro more than the micro. Where am I giving up too much space? Where am I playing impatiently? Where am I not punishing things I should be? What am I dropping executionally that I can practice, etc.?
So if you were to take chess as a comparison, you're not looking at the individual moves as much as where you are in the game. If it was for the current pace and flow of the game, the right move.
Imagine if I'm for the chess example, it's am I playing too slow? Am I playing really defensive and giving my opponent too much space? And should I be playing more aggressive? More than it is, oh, this was a mistake. Because generally speaking, I'm at a level where I notice those mistakes as they happen. Oh, I shouldn't have pressed there because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And so it's more the macro stuff that I'm looking for.
I see. That makes sense. So what we do a lot is, so because you're in VR and you're going at it with another player, and there are physics interactions, going at different speeds and giving your opponent more or less time changes a lot about the things you can practice. Recently, what we've been introducing is kind of sparring practice from, martial arts, where you go slower, where you give your opponent more time. If you see them setting up a move, you're gonna let them set it up and then just practice countering it or diffusing it instead of breaking the setup before it happens. It's kind of a different. It trains more the technical skill of the players than the pace and the pressuring the opponent part. I think both are valuable, and kind of switching between them gives probably some of the better results.
That makes sense.
When you're in a tournament and you're facing someone stronger than you, how do you approach that fight?
I say I'm gonna win.
Just assume you're gonna win, and then
Always assume you're gonna win.
okay, always assume you're gonna win.
And the reason you do that is you don't want to be giving up. Anytime you're giving up, you're already lost.
Yes, but it is a lot of times if you don't give up, even if you're on 1 HP, you can still get back. It's hard, but it can happen.
The big thing is, right, I think one thing that people get in their heads is when they're fighting someone better, they analyze their play worse because they think their opponent is superhuman in some way. I do the same thing.
Yes.
And so what you need to do is remember that your opponent is just a person who is thinking sometimes better than you, and therefore they are going to make mistakes, they're going to have habits, they're going to have patterns that you can still exploit.
Okay, so keep calm and focus on on winning. So there's always
Exactly.
How do you adjust your playstyle when facing someone weaker than you?
I play low risk, and the reason I do that is that a player who is worse than me is going to be quote-unquote random and hard to analyze, but they're also going to take a lot of high-risk actions because they're not quite analyzing the situation well enough. And therefore, if I play slow, patient, and let them make mistakes, I will win.
Okay, so it's kind of a you trying to win against a weaker player. What if you don't want to win necessarily?
If you don't want to win?
All right, let me go through some situations. If you fight a new player in Rubble, in a lot of cases, people starting out, when they queue up, they're gonna meet black belt after black belt that has 10 times the hours as them fight after fight. And just getting your ass beat all the time sucks. And well, as people who wanna support newer players and help them in learning, just beating their ass all the time isn't the way to go. It's kind of a unique situation here where I'm not right now on my throne trying not to get overthrown by a newcomer. I mean, sure, that situation does in tournaments and stuff definitely happens if you're the stronger player. But if you're just, sparring out there, betting against people, you're not necessarily trying to win. I guess it's not something you have to worry about much in your game.
I guess it's a bit of a social faux pas to go easy on people because it's a sign of disrespect that you're not respecting them enough to try, I guess. Try as hard as you would.
It really depends on the person. If they keep hitting the rematch button again and again, I'm gonna go a little harder each time because I respect the determination. It's a different culture, I think, in that respect, because especially if you're queuing against people that are still in the tutorial phase, that haven't unlocked all the moves, you're not gonna use any moves they haven't unlocked yet, but you're still gonna show them what you can do with the moves they do have, which is gonna be some silly stuff sometimes that they haven't thought of yet. It's an interesting social situation. Right, and I think that's also where I'm gonna end the interview. This was awesome, very interesting.
Awesome, thank you for talking.
Thanks for coming. And do you have any questions or anything you're curious about?
Honestly, not really. This was very in-depth. Thank you. I have learned a lot.
I hope this can be kind of a resource for people that haven't heard of the game, that maybe are even starting playing the game, but haven't heard of some of the mechanics. Hitstun, for example, a hitstop is not something commonly known by people. Neither is the field of view thing, where you can affect structures outside of your range. I hope they can learn some new knowledge there, and definitely learn from the fighting game, the knowledge there. And for people maybe that are interested in fighting games, seeing how that translates to a complex 3D game with movement and physics. It's a very weird one, but it's very fun. Do check it out. I'm gonna drop some links in the description for the people whose clips I showed, that you can take a closer look at the actual footage. I only showed short clips. There's much more there. Many more resources. If you want to link a channel or research paper, I'll also put that in the description. And thank you very much.